This podcast is for informational purposes only and should not be considered legal, medical, or mental health advice. The views and opinions expressed do not necessarily reflect the official policy or position of the podcast and are not intended to malign any religion, group, club, organization, business, individual, anyone, or anything. I'm Sarah Edmondson.
And I'm Anthony Nippy Ames. And this is
A Little Bit Culty.
Cults are commonplace now. From fandoms to fads, we're examining them all. We look at what happens when things that seem like a great thing at first go bad.
Every week, we chat with survivors, experts, and whistleblowers for real culty stories told directly by the people who lived through them, because we want you to learn a few things that we've had to learn the hard way.
For example, if you think you're too smart to get sucked into something culty, you might be prime recruitment material, and who knows, you could already be in a cult. If you're not aware of your programming, you're probably being programmed, so keep listening to find out.
We'll talk about all sorts of topics on the show, but be aware, this podcast might contain stories that could be alarming to some of our listeners, so please check our show notes for more detailed descriptions and take care of yourself.
Subscribe to our Patreon for Thursday bonus episodes, Q&A, and all sorts of exclusive content. That's patreon.com/a-little-bit-culty.
Welcome to Season 7 of A Little Bit Culty.
Sinking down to the depths of the ocean, hanging on to it, my love. If I let go of it all, I could.
Welcome back, everybody, to Part 2 with Professor Robin Boyle-Laisure. If you missed Part 1, you know what to do. Skip it back and get informed. And now, Part 2. Robin, welcome back to A Little Bit Culty.
Thank you. I'm so excited.
So you've been studying this and writing about it and doing your papers and working with ICSA. What was it like for you to see this case go to trial and then for Keith Raniere to get 120 years?
I was thrilled.
We were too. Yeah.
It was the most significant landmark piece, case precedent that could have been set in the past 100 years.
Wow.
I mean, it was really impactful because, first of all, they convicted him on all 7 charges, right? Racketeering, possession of child pornography, etc. But also, it took away the problem leading up until that case has been proving at trial that the cult leader was brainwashing adherents,
Right.
the members. And that proof of brainwashing was problematical back in Patty Hearst trial.
Right.
Yes.
We just covered that with Rebecca Lamov about brainwashing, which is a book. I don't know if you've read it.
Not
The
yet.
Instability of Truth. Highly recommend you guys connect. Sidebar. Go ahead.
Okay. And
That was a sidebar.
Tell us why it didn't work with Patty Hearst, for those who don't know that
it
episode.
didn't work with Patty Hearst because in order for evidence to be admitted at trial, it needs to fit certain elements of proof, right? A standard, an evidentiary standard. And the courts were rejecting brainwashing as a theory because it had not been fully accepted in, let's say, the psychiatric community or in the legal community. The work, it was Margaret Singer who was trying to convince. She was an expert witness for the Hearst trial. She relied upon Robert J. Lifton's work, who had studied prisoners of war from the Korean War and had studied intellectuals who were in Chinese relearning universities during the early communist era. So in other words, Margaret Singer wasn't making it up. She had a lot of material under her belt, but nevertheless, the impact of using the trafficking statutes, and this was my hope, was that it would make it an easier path for prosecutors to prove that the cult leader committed these crimes, and easier in the sense that did not have to prove that the victim was brainwashed. And the fact that Raniere was convicted on all of these counts, including sex trafficking and racketeering, makes it easier in a way because it sets precedent for future prosecutions.
And from my understanding, it was the precedent for the R. Kelly case and also for Lawrence Ray from the
Weinstein.
And I don't think, was it Weinstein?
Yeah, the
as well?
language in the Weinstein case was similar to the language in the NXIVM case.
Right.
As well.
And
Yeah, Robin, I was also saying, I've said this many times, I think the fact that there was an actual branding, a physical manifestation, allowed them to go back and connect the dots on the emotional abuse. So there's a physical abuse that everyone was outraged by, and then I think that was a apt entry point for people to go, okay, there's emotional coercion going on to get people to this point, and they could link those dots fairly successfully.
Absolutely.
I think in our case.
Absolutely. The fact that you had that physical symbol and it was done so crudely.
And lied to and told there was something else.
But
And yet it
without
wasn't
anesthesia and so forth.
right. And it wasn't part of the trial, though. So it was what was necessary to get law enforcement involved. But it wasn't what he was convicted for.
But it was the portal for people to consider that you weren't there by choice and that you were coerced there. And then once the coercion was seen to achieve the physical label, people were then more, I think, impressionable to consider there was emotional coercion there. And then once the evidence of all the emotional stuff, it's easy to go, okay, this emotional abuse is the precursor to all the physical stuff. You're not going to have the physical stuff without all this other stuff. And I think linking those two, whether people are conscious or not, go, okay, this guy's the mastermind behind this. I don't know the ins and outs of all this, but he certainly did it. And without him, these people do not do this and behave like that.
Right.
Right?
Right.
Is that fair? Yeah.
Agree. Because emotional abuse is hard to prove too,
Yes.
right? So
Yeah.
you would need psychiatric records and so on and so forth. But people in a cult aren't seeing a therapist on the outside.
Right.
You
And
know?
I imagine with the Patty Hearst things too, there was a lot of groundswell of like, oh, she's a rich, privileged person. She's, blah, blah, blah. And there's a lot of, you have to overcome that a lot too. And the knowledge base and education and awareness of legal to know what they're looking at was different in the 70s than it is now.
That's right. But you asked about current state of the law and where
Yes.
it's heading.
Yeah, that's where I want.
And course of
go.
control now.
And just to
Yeah.
set the question up a little bit too, I constantly have this impression, I did during the trial and then subsequently with Diddy and Epstein and all these other things that have come out, that there has to be something in the legal world that's protecting the perpetrator on some level. This is maybe feels a little conspiratorial and conjecture, but I always got the impression it's like, how do these guys get this far without some help? And with some help with people in positions of power to protect the perpetrator, then all of a sudden there's this groundswell of going, hey, look, we see this now. We see it. It's overt in Scientology, but there's this rot in our legal system that allows these people to do this. And hopefully this is part of the change. I'll let you take over from there.
Well, I think what you're saying is something that people wonder about, which is, you mentioned people in positions of power. Epstein was wealthy. Diddy was wealthy. People in positions of power are able to participate in these horrendous crimes with many, many victims over a long period of time without due process, without enforcement coming in, law enforcement, and putting in stop to it. And I think the key there is that they are powerful, that they know powerful people, and that they are wealthy. And there's a socioeconomic attribute to the crime, right? The people who are perpetrators are in a privileged class. And to the extent that that is allowing them some protection, perhaps it's people that they know, politicians or so forth, who have sought some protection. And some of this we don't know. I mean, we're never probably
Right.
going to know the true story with
correct.
Epstein. In terms of where the law is heading, I think what's interesting to follow is going to be that fuzzy line between, you have the leader, you have the trafficker, you have the cult leader, and they have manipulated the next line down, right? The next level down.
Ghislaine Maxwell's of the world.
The Maxwells of the world, or the Allison Mack.
Yes.
of the world. And how much should we hold them accountable for their bad deeds? Because how much were they under the thumb of the evil leader? And that is an interesting area of the law. I know different states have allowed reduced sentences for, let's say, women who have been incarcerated even for sex trafficking, but were able to prove that they were manipulated to do what they did. So they're the mid-managers.
So on the heels of that question, I firmly believe if Allison Mack does not meet Keith Raniere, this doesn't happen. She's acting in a TV show somewhere in Canada probably right now. Do you feel that if Ghislaine Maxwell doesn't meet Jeffrey Epstein, the same?
Yes.
Yeah.
They were both true agents
Yeah, I agree.
of the manipulator. And they also had another layer down. So with Epstein, victims of his ring have explained how young girls were coming to their home to bring them to Epstein's palace, if you will, to massage him and do all of these things. So Maxwell wasn't the only one doing the recruiting. Maxwell had other young people who could relate to these targets because they were young and female, and bringing them to Epstein. Similar
It's an enterprise.
Similar case with
Rachel Thomas?
exactly. You're reading my mind. Rachel Thomas.
Yeah, we were actually connected when I first got out of NXIVM, and I completely forgot about her story until I read your book. I should reach out to her again because she was one of the first people to reach out to me and even help me understand the trafficking aspect because I didn't fully understand it when we blew the whistle.
So she was a college student in Atlanta, one of the schools in Atlanta, and she was approached by young people like herself who suggested she go into modeling. She then meets the person who later becomes the defendant, and she provides information about her family because she signs a modeling contract. So she provides her family's address and so forth, information about them. And it turns out that it wasn't modeling, the traditional modeling, but she was being set up for sex trafficking, having commercial sex with strangers for his gain. And it turns out that it was not only her, but there was a ring in Atlanta. And this enterprise involved college women from around the schools in Atlanta. And he was arrested and convicted. And that was one of the earlier, I think, sex trafficking cases, and one that involved college students. But the interesting thing is it was young people who looked like her who helped bring her into this ring. And that's something to be aware of. Yeah.
Leveraged trust is what we've called it. Yeah.
I'm going to reach it back out to her. She'd be a great guest to reconnect with.
It's a difficult one because the venom for Allison Mack during this whole thing was pretty brutal. And
From strangers.
From strangers, yeah. From people who demand a binary explanation, a black and white explanation. And, it brings into, I guess the question it brings up is one of responsibility. And that's why I put that quote in our book, the King Baldwin one. There's a Kingdom of Heaven, a movie with Ed Norton, and then I guess it's a King Baldwin quote about kings may move you, a father may influence you, but your soul is to your own keeping. Mm-hmm. I think, you can say you're doing all these things for the right reasons, but ultimately you have to tend to your own morality, and that is your responsibility, not because you blindly followed someone.
Which is tricky when people are lying to you.
Right. This podcast wouldn't exist without our fantastic, supportive, generous patrons. Come find us over on Patreon. We're at patreon.com/alittlebitculty. Go there for bonus episodes, exclusive content, and the occasional Zoom with our fan favorites from our past episodes. Subscribe now and join us. That's patreon.com/alittlebitculty. And now, a brief message from our Little Bit Culty sponsors. Remember, when you support our sponsors, you support our podcast.
You've heard from our sponsors. Now let's get back to a little bit culty, shall we? I have some personal things I'm struggling with our kids and how to protect them. Before we get into that, can you just lay out some very practical skills and things that's important for parents to know with their children to protect them?
I think the number one important thing for parents to teach their children is that the parent is always available for them and that they love them unconditionally. There will be no judgment should the child make a mistake. So as the child ages, that child may befriend someone who is manipulative. If the child goes back to mom and dad, I think the message is, we're not going to pass judgment on you for having this bad friend, but we're here to help you. And our door is always open to you, because there may be a time, and we hope this happens less and less frequently, but there may be a time when that child is really kind of under the spell of a cult or under the spell of a coercive one-on-one relationship and wants to come home and is having trouble leaving. And you want that door, your welcome mat there at the door. That's the number one message I think parents should have in mind when they parent their children. But along the way, I think it's important for parents to raise children to be aware at age-appropriate steps. So a lot of information very early on may be too scary. So kind of metering out the information at age-appropriate times, but also to teach their children. So you're parenting them, you're guiding them, but you're also giving them independence so that they can become independent-minded and be able to think on their own, so that when they are in a situation with a controlling individual, they're able to speak up and think critically about what this person is saying to them. And this really, I broke down in the book where I talked about raising a savvy child. I broke it down age by age because I think piling on information too young can really scare them. But I think putting it out there at certain checkpoints is helpful.
And they'll tell you, too. You can kind of get a pulse on them and what they're ready to digest, I think.
A couple of things came to light when I was researching the book, which is from when I was raising the children, stranger danger was what we called strangers to be careful of. But now researchers are saying that don't teach your child that it's the stranger to be aware of. Teach your child that it's the that it may be a tricky adult, because it's more likely someone the child is familiar with,
right,
who's the manipulator. It is more likely the neighbor or the friend of the families.
Right.
Or
the coach, the sports coach.
Someone playing the long game.
And so it's the tricky adult. And to teach them critical thinking skills. To do that, encourage your child when they make decisions that are good decisions, praise them for the good decision that they made, even at a young age. So, oh, that was a good decision that you made, that you put on your rain boots because it's raining outside. Just simple acknowledgments of good choices, good decisions may help your child later in life be confident, self-confident in decisions that they are making. Because when they are within range of manipulation, it's kind of like being pulled over in an undertow of the ocean. They're flipped around and they're finding a hard time putting their feet on the ground in the ocean. So I would say praising them for good decision making, helping them, coaching them to be able to make decisions and have self-confidence in the decisions that they make, critically questioning the information that's being provided, feeling confident that they can speak to authority and speak up. All of these are good traits to teach your children. For the book, I interviewed Kathy McCullough, who is a nursery school principal coordinator at the Garden City Community Church in my town. And she said that children more and more are being taught to speak up more about their feelings or what they would like, which is a good thing, because back when I was born in the late 50s, so in my generation, children were told not to speak up. But in her view, children now are being encouraged to speak their minds, which is a good thing. It's a good sign.
Mm-hmm. I have a question. I try not to be controversial on our podcast because I want to reach people, but I have some strong feelings about some stuff that's going. You're in academia. If I were to drop my son off at some of the schools that I went to, or Columbia, and he comes back a year later and he's wearing
A keffiyeh?
and protesting and not letting Jews into dorms or whatever, and he comes home, that's alarming to me, particularly in a place that is ostensibly trying to teach critical thought, something that he probably just learns about and ends up doing something like that. What recourse would parents have on that, regardless of what it is? That's just a content point that I'm somewhat objectionable to, and to think that that stuff is going to make a real difference in the Middle East, I think is narcissistic at the very least, and naive, and has a naive arrogance to it that I had at that age, right? I just didn't have a cause on my campus that I was willing to be malevolent about. So what then? Because you think you're sending your kid off to one of the best institutes in the country to think, and they're being dogmatic all of a sudden.
Well, I think the way to approach a college student or someone who's not in college, but at that kind of transition point between being a teenager and an adult in those young, early 20s, is to ask them questions. So tell me about this organization. Tell me about what you believe in. Have you thought about, have you considered, have you read? Who are some of the leaders? What attracts you to that point of view? Have you considered this other point of view? I think asking questions would be more useful than to say, I really don't believe in your politics, or I think you're on the wrong side of this issue, or we're very disappointed in you for that you picked this side. I realize it's controversial, or even threatening and saying, well, I don't think we're sending you back to that college if you're coming home with that T-shirt. And I can see where parents might want to say that.
Particularly if they're paying for it.
If they're paying for it, hefty payments. Yeah. But I think having them think critically by asking them questions. Same thing if you find that your son or daughter is kind of like drifting towards an organization like a cult or a religion, and you feel as if it might be too controlling, and you've noticed that they've changed behavior, you could say, you used to like to do this activity. Have you done that activity in a while? You used to like to go swimming. You used to like to ride your bike. You used to jog. You used to go in road races. Have you been doing those activities? How come you're not hanging out with your good friend, your roommate, and just asking questions to kind of bring that child around to thinking about the life and the person they used to be and how they've changed.
I think that's such solid advice. And I'm thinking back to the years that my mother would say things like that to me, like, what about acting? You used to act. And I remember, and also saying things like, this is, wow, you're working really hard. This is like all consuming. What about taking a little break or taking a little rest? And I remember, like, she probably planted seeds and it was good in the long run. But I remember in the moment being like, you don't understand. Like, this is what it takes. This is my life now. And like, you don't get it because you're not doing this work. I remember being super irritated by that.
Yeah,
but I
remember that too.
but at the same time, like, I turned out okay in the end, and she kept the door open, and she was one of the first people that I told, and she never said, I told you so, or anything like that. So that her welcome mat was definitely always at her front door. I think what also planted seeds for me was other people outside of
that we respected.
Right, yeah, because it's like the mother-daughter dynamic also has that sort of like defiance. Like, I was individuating, right, with NXIVM as well as joining a cult. Like it was, you have your thing, Mom. This is my thing. And that was part of my like trying to separate, which is a whole other layer.
Right. That was great that she kept the welcome mat out and that she didn't pass judgment when you came back, and she didn't say, I told you so, which so many of us are tempted to say, right?
Yeah.
I told you so. I told you that.
We definitely had some other family members who did that, which is hard.
Well, I'll say, and I said this in our book, I have like 4 best friends in my life, really close friends. None of them took a training. Not one of them. I tried with all of them. And when I got out, they weren't like, I told you so. They were like, glad you're back. Jesus. Like, and it was like tongue in cheek. And they were like, there was no kind of like, and they're my best friends to this day.
That's great.
And yeah, it was pretty cool. And reflecting on it, as I looked back, I was like, oh my God, they never did it. And they were my best friends while I was in and while I was out.
Right. And if someone were to say, I think you're in a cult, your reaction is going to be, that's ridiculous. Of course it's not a cult, because you're not seeing it.
Yep.
Yeah.
And you have in mind what a cult might be, and it's not this.
And it's not. And also, we are what we
That's a
were
good
trained
point.
with was cults are doing bad things. This is actually true, I believe, that cults do bad things. And when people don't know, this is what we were trained in. When people,
Well, they gave us the definition of a cult. So.
Yeah, but they also said, like, when people don't have a specific thing to point to, like you're murdering people or stealing from people or whatever, that they just use the word cult to sort of like cut you off at the knees and make it look bad but not be specific, which is kind of how the word cult can be used in a not useful way in general. Like, oh, that's just a cult. Well, okay, what are they doing in the group that's unhealthy or toxic or bad or illegal? Right? So when people use the word cult, I was like, well, you're just doing that thing to discredit me because you don't understand what we're doing and what's the bad thing, right? And why we were able to wake up so quickly is we, in one very small instant, saw all the bad things all at once. And then we're like, oh, right, it actually is a cult. And we're going to take it down.
Right. That's right.
For more context on what brought us here, check out my memoir. It's called Scarred, the true story of how I escaped NXIVM, the cult that bound my life. I narrate the audio version, and it's also available on Amazon, Audible, and at most bookstores. And now, a brief message from our Little Bit Culty sponsors. And remember, when you support our sponsors, you're supporting this podcast.
Break time's over, people. Let's get back to this episode of A Little Bit Culty. It's a good one.
Back to what you were saying about critical thinking, I think those are really important things, and I love how your book lays out very specific questions. The tricky thing, I think, with us with NXIVM is that we thought we were in a critical thinking program. We were using tools of critical thinking, but it was all based on a false premise. So how do you think something like that can be weaponized to actually protect somebody like Keith Raniere?
Right, because I think from what I recall with, as you explained in your book, Sarah, that it was weaponized because when you did think critically, it was turned against the thinker. So it was turned against you, right? There's something wrong that you need to work out if you're raising those questions. You really have to do some more work on yourself. Right? It's kind of gaslighting is the term that's become used more frequently. So with critical thinking, it's that old button that people used to wear in the 60s, question authority, comes to mind. Just question authority. Question not so much you, but question what you're hearing, what you're seeing, the impact. And also question, and I think this is important, whether you have individual choice, right? Are you being persuaded to wear certain things, to stay away from your friends, not to answer the phone, or to answer the phone because somebody else is telling you? And I think that isolation is very important. So if someone in your life is telling you that your parents are evil, that your friends are all bad, that you have to stay with me because I'm the only one who's good for you, that look at your past life, that's been horrible the way you've been raised. If they're making you feel bad about all of these things in your life, then you should really self-examine that and question that direction.
Very good advice.
So
What?
This is my dad joke moment. I saw graffiti and it said question authority in one color, and then there was like in a different color, why?
Well, it is
Lighten the mood a little.
it is something that we struggle with because I think we really try to do all the proper parenting things that you're supposed to do these days. And one of the things that we struggle with is like iPads and sugar.
Yes.
And especially with the 11-year-old, it's got to the point where if he's spending a day with a friend, we want him to make good choices and we're not going to
Mike and
monitor.
Ike's.
And this one, like, we really don't have a lot of sugar in our house. But, like, if you have a treat, it's like one a day. Like, if you're having ice cream, there's no cake later. Like, it's just one. And he was out with a friend and he came back and basically shared with us all the things he had. And it was like 10 things.
Mike and Ike's.
10 things. And we were like, I was trying to not overreact because I want him to be able to tell me. And I said, like, I really appreciate you being honest. And I would hope you'd make better choices in the future. But, like, we can't control you. So you're going to have to figure that out for yourself. I said, how do you feel? And he goes, like, I don't feel good. My stomach is sore. I'm like, well, just remember that next time, you know?
Right,
And
right.
you're alive, but it's not good for you. You know that. But the thing that I was thinking about is that, like, you know, especially at this age, is he's starting to individuate and we're getting a little more like, my authoritarianism is kicking in a bit. Like, you know, no, you need to listen to us and you need to respect us because I'm like losing him in that way. But the part of your book that made me think I need to adjust myself is that when you give a kid a whole bunch of rules and have this sort of like mini dictatorship in your house, that may feel good for them later on, that they may feel that they need to find something that has a lot of rules and that has a lot of answers, and it may feel normal for them to be a subject of a dictatorship.
That's right. That's right. So although you want to provide the guardrails, you don't want them to be living by your commandments, right? All the time. Because if your household is run with an excessive, let's say, if there's such a scale, an excessive amount of rules, then that child is going to grow up looking for an environment in which there's a lot of rules to follow. And that could be, doesn't necessarily mean, but it could be a situation such as in a cult when there are a lot of rules to follow and a lot of do's and don'ts. But one of the things, I don't want to end our podcast without mentioning the prevalence of online solicitations, online predators, very important. I remember parenting my children. My son in particular loved gaming. And some of those sites that he was on were benign. But what I'm finding out is that more and more the predators are luring children off of those sites and onto ones like Discord, for instance. There were a number of cases that went to trial and sometimes the defendants pled guilty, where the predators would find children on these sites that seemed friendly, but then move them to Discord or something similar, and they're able to talk to them in a hidden room or a chat room. And they don't pounce on them right away. They groom them for months, befriend them, and then try to convince them. Now, the end result can be one of three results. One result is that they convince them to meet them somewhere, and then they take advantage of them, sexually advantage of them, perhaps seclude them. Another is that they convince them to leave the home and that they put them into a sex trafficking enterprise. And the third is sextortion, where the child is manipulated into providing sexually explicit graphic images of themselves. And then the extortionist is saying, I'm going to share those unless you provide money, unless you provide more material, and it escalates. And children have taken their own lives. And sometimes in the situation with the sextortionist, that could happen within the course of an hour. The threat is made, The child is trying to send money from his or her college savings. It's not enough. The person is asking for more money. They're threatening their family. They're threatening to expose their friends, to harm their friends. And children have taken their own lives. It's a very serious situation. And the way in which parents can react to this is, yes, to put in the parental controls, but still the recommendation is to keep their computers within the family room, the den, not in their own bedroom, to monitor, to not only put in the parental controls, but also to monitor them by being around, to ask them for passwords so that you know which sites they're on, and to keep their passwords, and just notice any change in behavior. So if your child is acting differently, maybe becoming more secluded, spending more and more time online, try to follow up on that. But that is a serious problem right now, which is online predator relationships.
It's one of the few episodes that I unabashedly sent to all my friends and family about the sextortion one.
With Brandon Guffey, who's, his son went through this, almost the textbook, the same thing that happened with the case study that you laid out about sextortion in your book. I wonder if it was the same.
The week that podcast dropped, we had an incident with some friends at one of the local schools here where someone was bullied online and ended up committing suicide. Like that week.
Yeah, it wasn't sextortion, but it was
online.
A teen suicide based on some online stuff. So this is a very important topic, and I think your book really covers a lot of ground and is an important resource for parents and for educators and also for people in all sorts of social work and people working with children. It's so important, and I wonder if there's any last important message that we didn't cover that you want to make sure that our audience knows for survivors or anyone affected by high control groups.
Thank you. Yes, I know on this podcast we've been talking about parents and children, but the book does have a chapter for those involved in the mental health field, for people who are counseling clients. It provides some hands-on advice as to the kinds of questions they might receive and perhaps how to handle someone who has exited a cult. It also provides some advice for law enforcement. There's a chapter for law enforcement. I try to include different avenues for different professions, and I hope that people find it useful. And thank you very much for inviting me on this program. I also have to thank two important people. One, I was able to find a literary agent to place this book, and that's Shoshana Crichton. And I am indebted to her for her assistance in placing it with a publisher. The publisher is Bloomsbury, and my editor, Kristen Karniski, took this under her wing and signed the contract with me. So I am indebted to both Bloomsbury, the editor, and my agent. Thank you very much. And thank you. I am a big fan of the two of you. I feel as if I know you. I certainly know your voices from the podcast. And I know your experience from SCARD and from the trial and everything I've read about you. So I feel as if I'm talking to my own family, and it's a pleasure to see you on my screen. So thank you for having me.
Thank you, Robin. We appreciate it.
Robin, it's such a treat. Thank you. Do you like what you hear on A Little Bit Culty? Then please do give us a rating, a review, and subscribe on iTunes, Spotify, or wherever you listen. Or even better, share this episode with someone who you think needs to hear it. Maybe they're in a cult. Maybe they're a little bit susceptible. Just share the love. Thanks. Well, I am so glad that we connected, and I feel like this is such an important book. I will definitely be giving copies to many of my friends with children.
Yes, it's also good to see that there's other people out there kind of recognizing the patterns and doing their work and advocacy as well.
Absolutely.
We have teammates out there.
We do. Thank you, Robin. And everyone else, please do let us know what you thought of this episode in the Instagram comments. Leave us a review. You know what to do.
Smash that like button, whatever that is.
See you next time.
Sinking down to the depths of the ocean, I'm hanging on to the weight of my love. If I let go of it all, I could leave, but I know I won't.
Little Bit Culty is a Trace 120 production, executive produced by Sarah Edmondson and Anthony Nippy Ames, in collaboration with Amphibian Media. Our co-creator is Jess Temple Tardy, audio engineering by Red Cayman Studios, and our writing and research is done by Emma Deal and Kristen Reeder. Our theme song, Cultivated, is by the artists John Bryant and Nigel Aslin.